Welcome, my friends, to the On the Blue Line podcast for law enforcement with Wayne Mulder. I am your host, Wayne Mulder. This is the podcast where we help law enforcement officers overcome the mental health toll of the profession to become better leaders and protectors on and off the job. In this 106th episode of Morning Roll Call, YouTube sucks. More on that in a minute. Flamingos apparently have fled the hurricane, and officers must hold themselves to a higher standard, and we talk about the idea of personal responsibility. Morning Roll Call starts now. If you break the law, if you decide to do this, we're going to hold you responsible.
You are the only good thing in someone's worst day. That is a privilege for a police officer.
At the very least, you could honor the sacrifices of police officers and their families.
We have the ability to save the Republic. Welcome. If this is your first time finding us, we do two podcasts. This is Morning Roll Call. This is just you and I sitting down. Normally I go over a couple news stories and we talk about something actionable. The other show we do is the Interview Room, and in there I sit down with different guests, and that one comes out on Thursday, so be sure to check that one out if you like a little bit different format. Be sure to follow us on social media, specifically on Twitter, formerly known or currently known as X, formerly known as Twitter, on the Blue Line and the number 1. I am most active on there, so that would be the place to join us. You can also find us on all the other social media at On the Blue Line Podcast, and normally I'm just copying over stuff that I put out on X, so go to the source. The other thing is be sure to leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you're watching. That's a huge help if you're enjoying this content, and I'd love to hear your feedback, and you can always send us an email at feedback@ontheblueline.com, feedback@ontheblueline.com. All right, this may be a little bit shorter of an episode. I know I say that sometimes and I go on for 40 minutes, but I just have a couple stories this week and just a few things of interest that I hope will be helpful to you. Let me start, though, with the communist at YouTube, a term I'm not using lightly, restricted my last video because of the law enforcement content. Ironically, the videos that I used in it were the same videos that were pulled directly from social media sites. So the argument that it needs to be throttled back because of the content is laughable at best. However, before I go back and edit those videos, be sure you can find it still. It is on YouTube if you want to check out last week's episode. However, you have to be logged in and you have to be over the age of 18 with a verified account, or it's not going to let you find the content. That being said, be sure to follow us on Rumble. As things go forward, there's a reason why I'm using X. There's a reason why I'm pushing people towards Rumble, if you would, because these free speech platforms are the future. And quite frankly, if you've listened to me for any period of time, it will not surprise you that there will be a day that I will move as quickly away from these Marxist platforms that are cutting back on free speech. So that is the future. So if you're enjoying the content, be sure to be following on Rumble, and again for social media on X. All right. Couple things. The first story is just kind of funny, has absolutely nothing to do with law enforcement, but flamingos are fleeing Florida. Well, they're not really fleeing Florida, but this story I thought was kind of funny, and I was like, well, I got to tell a flamingo story. I mean, how often do I get to bring you a flamingo story? So this is now you got to remember, I am lost. You could use the word lost, but I currently reside in the state of Florida. However, I'm a Midwest boy at heart. So from the state of Indiana, that's where I was pretty much raised, not born, but I was extremely young when we moved there. So when I came across this article, and this is from CNN, it said, when you think of flamingos, the images that come to mind are African water holes, the Caribbean and Florida. I think Busch Gardens. You don't normally see them much in Central Florida. Typically, that's more of a South Florida thing, and then Busch Gardens. So that's where I go. However, almost anywhere else you could expect to see them except Waynesville, Ohio. So when this Jacob saw the Facebook post about flamingos at Cedar Creek State Park near Dayton, Ohio, he had to rush there and see it for himself. And sure enough, there were flamingos just hanging out, sleeping, walking about a foot of water. And I find this story fascinating because it would be something, not a huge birding guy, but I do find birds interesting. And all of a sudden you're in the Midwest and you're like, why do I feel like I'm in Busch Gardens right now? So Jerry Lawrence, the state director of the research for the Audubon, Florida, said that since Hurricane Idalia blew through, they've gotten reports of flamingos from around Florida, as well as Georgia, the Carolinas, Texas, Kentucky, and many other places to include Ohio. He speculates that the birds were flying between Cuba and the Yucatan and then got diverted when Hurricane Idalia essentially pushed them north and south. So it kind of just split where they were headed when they were flying. So he said they're still going through the data, but the birds flew north because of the storm and a lot more than typical. He said, occasionally we might get a flamingo or two that gets a little lost. He goes, what we're seeing right now is unprecedented. In fact, boat captain Vinny Fugit spotted a group of 17 flamingos walking in the surf and eating at Treasure Island near St. Petersburg, Florida. And for those of you not from the state, that's right here in Central Florida. So the birds finished eating and flew away around sunset. He goes, I've never seen a flamingo here after living here my entire life. So they did say, if you do find flamingos, so let's say you're in Ohio, and you're just walking around and there you find a flamingo. He said, these birds are stressed right now, which is probably true because a big windstorm just pushed you off course and you're like, this doesn't feel like Florida anymore. So if you do come across them, they could be very stressed birds. And not to worry, flamingos are capable of flying thousands of miles over open ocean. So we're confident the flamingos can get back if indeed Ohio becomes too cold for them, as it certainly will. So anyway, that's just a fun story for you. I hope you enjoyed it. All right. So just two other stories that I want to talk about. And honestly, this is all around this idea of personal responsibility. So the first one isn't, sadly, we hear these stories a lot. I could give you personal stories of people that I've actually known who've done similar things, and it's horrible every time it happens. It's a sting on the badge every time it happens, but there is something, as we say all the time, law enforcement's made up of humans, right? So anytime it's made up of people, you're going to have problems because people bring problems because people are inherently sinful, right? That's what we know. That is truth, is that people are inherently sinful. So it's not surprising when sinful people do sinful things. But I want to tell this story and then tell another story because I think that when taken together, it draws a conclusion here that I want to bring to you. So this story, about a week or two ago, Conroe PD officer accused of stealing from a vehicle towed after a traffic stop. Officer Raymond McCreary was arrested on Thursday after he stole a wallet and cash from inside this vehicle while it was being towed, or prior to it being towed. What's very frustrating to me is that he was a 18-year veteran of the Conroe Police Department, so he'd been there quite a while. And as the chief said, myself and the dedicated men and women of this department are appalled and embarrassed by the actions of McCreary. We understand that his actions tarnish the reputation of our department, but his actions in no way represent the honorable conduct of the dedicated personnel who serve this community with integrity and pride on a daily basis. Misconduct of any kind will not be tolerated, and he was, of course, arrested, but he did admit to stealing it. So there wasn't a question here. He admitted that he had taken it, and then they were able to get the money back as well to him. Here's why I bring this up. So anytime this happens, it's a sting on law enforcement, and it's absolutely horrible. And so this guy commits this theft, right? And he's held accountable as he should be. So then in the same week comes out this viral video. It's almost like this moron in Maryland was like, hey, you think cops do stupid things? Hold my beer. Give me a minute. I'm going to go do something even more stupid. So this video, which is playing on the screen, make sure you're watching us on Rumble or YouTube, I guess, for now. Just so you know, back to the YouTube thing, because it really pisses me off. The YouTube thing is, it's the largest platform. Right. So Alphabet, the owner of Google, YouTube, you have to be on these platforms for anyone to find you. Like if I just put the show on Rumble, no one would find it. So and this is the same thing like Steven Crowder was going through, right? The whole Louder with Crowder show issues and the Mug Club, where he's constantly being fought by these morons. So please, if you're enjoying the content, make sure you're also going to places like Rumble to find the content. And then please make sure you're interacting with it if you're enjoying it. If you're not, well, there's, I don't know, a million, maybe, other podcasts out there. Probably not a million, but darn close, other podcasts out there. So anyway, back to the story at hand. So it seems like this officer in Maryland was like, hey, let me see if I could do something even more dumb. So this video was viral. It's had millions of views. Honestly, I didn't comment on it when I first saw it on X because I wasn't 100% sure what I was looking at first. Obviously, the guy's doing something wrong, but I'm like, is this really as blatant as it appears? Sometimes I just have to wait till there's more news and more corroborating facts before I comment on something, because I'm like, I don't know. This is just so bizarre. But what you see is what you got. So essentially, this officer, he's an officer in Prince George County, Maryland. He was suspended over a viral video that shows him kissing a woman before the pair went into the back of the patrol car and were in there for 40 minutes. Executive Command at PGPD is aware of the video, and he is he's currently been identified, and his police powers are now suspended as the investigation is taking place. So essentially, as you're seeing here in the video, they hug. If you haven't seen this yet, the way the witness describes the incident is he's hearing this arguing, right? And he's like, something isn't right with these two. So it sounds like maybe the female and the cop initially were arguing a little bit. And so then he starts videotaping it. He's like, they're acting like suspicious people. And typically I call police for suspicious people. So instead, I'm going to videotape the suspicious people and see where this leads. Well, where it led was the two of them end up kissing. So I guess they made up, whatever the argument was. They made up, they start kissing at the front of the vehicle. And then they're kind of like holding hands, kind of meandering. And then if you're watching this, you'll see then they get in the back of the vehicle. And then according to, obviously this is only like a 46-second clip or whatever, but according to the witnesses, they were in there for about 40 minutes. This happens at 7 p.m. on a Sunday at a park in town. So there's kids playing. In fact, if you're watching this clip, you'll see the heads of kids go bouncing by while these two are in here being suspicious people. So at first, again, I saw this and I wasn't 100% sure what I was even watching. And then come find out, Marlette, who is the officer here, hopefully former officer, his wife comes out and says, lamenting the entire incident, saying this is extremely embarrassing and painful, as you can imagine. But she goes on, and this is her statement: yes, this is a very tough time for me and my kids. As embarrassing and painful as this is, please check in on us. We need the support, the love, and most of all, the respect from the community and our families. Yes, I know what's been going on. No, I'm not updating anyone on this situation after today. And this was from the subject's wife, Paula Marlette. She goes on to say that her husband had been cheating for years, and then identified the female who he is having this tryst with as Virginia, whose husband, quote, left her a long time ago because she cheated. So she ends with, this is what his wife puts out: I love you all, except for you, Virginia. You can rot in hell. Uses the B word. He, surprise, surprise, had been previously suspended in 2015 and indicted by a grand jury for child abuse and assault charges. And those charges were eventually dropped, and somehow he still maintained his job. And here we are. I'm not even going to go down the road of my opinion of unions and stuff saving some of these jobs, which is sadly what happens. I haven't gone into details on this to know for sure that that was what occurred in this previous case, but I hope this time that they're going to hold him accountable and that he will be looking for a new line of work. So why do I discuss those two stories? So one of the things when I sit down and do morning roll call is I go through some aggregate sites, right? Like Law Enforcement Today, a couple daily news sites where there's a lot of aggregated news stories. That's how I come up with stories like the flamingos fleeing Florida. So I go through and I read all these different stories and I look for something that's applicable, but then that also has like a lesson or something that we can learn from it, right? So that's what I was doing this week. And I realized a couple things, right? So I want to talk more about this later, but we have what's going on with these January 6th defendants and the length of sentences and stuff that they are getting. More on that later, because if you're a free speech advocate, if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the First Amendment, you should be up in arms. You should be absolute. Again, what they did, that's a separate issue. But the way that the so-called justice system is handling it is absolutely disgusting. And what these people are actually being held accountable for is a huge free speech issue. Anyway, but more on that in the future. So, looking at those stories, looking at the stories, just between the people saying Bidenomics is working, which would not be the way it looks when I pay my monthly bills. Over and over, right? So I'm just seeing all these different stories. And then you're seeing all these criminals not being held responsible. You're seeing retailers having to put in pretty much fog machines to try to choke people out and get them out of their store when they're committing crimes. You've got just blatant people walking in, committing crimes and leaving. You've got cops not showing up because they've defunded the police and people aren't even there. So then people come in and the people at the business are having to take control, and you see them beating them with sticks or whatever, which I'm perfectly good with. You know, if someone's committing a crime and you need to take action, take action. But you have all of this madness going on. And what really came to me this week as kind of an underlying issue is that this concept of personal responsibility is gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. People don't understand it. Whether we're talking law enforcement or civilians, this concept of what is personal responsibility doesn't even equate with most people's thinking. The sad thing is that when you talk about freedom, actual freedom, not this modern interpretation of freedom. This modern interpretation is just disgusting. It's this whole freedom to do whatever I want, right? It's whatever I want to go do, then I should be able to do it. This, my liberty is my ability to just express myself in any way I want to do anything I want to do, and there shouldn't be any consequences for my actions. That is not freedom. In fact, it's best described as servitude, actually. But personal responsibility goes hand in hand with the true interpretation of freedom. Personal responsibility is saying, hey, I am going to take responsibility for whatever it is here. So sometimes, as we've seen with these two cases this week with these officers, is holding yourself accountable. It's saying, hey, listen, I'm not going to do what my flesh wants me to do. I'm not going to, maybe the guy had some bills to pay, so he sees this cash and he takes it. Personal responsibility is saying, I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. I may need money, but that's not my money. I mean, it's even worse when it's done under the color of law, but it should be true with all of us. That's not mine. I'm not going to touch it. I am not going to do this because I hold myself to a higher standard. That is personal responsibility. That is accountability. And that's what we have right now is a drought of this. In fact, I would argue that with a few other issues, it's probably one of the most dangerous things going on right now because our system of government as a republic requires personal responsibility. In the same way that it requires a moral and religious people, hand in hand with that moral and religious people that John Adams was talking about is this concept of personal responsibility. Because if you don't take responsibility for your action, that's where the morality comes in, right? That's where the religious people comes in. Because typically, if you operate by a moral code or a religious code, you operate within this concept of personal responsibility because I take responsibility for my actions because I believe, whether it's because of a higher power or because of a moral code, that this is right, and hence I'm not going to take this other action because it is wrong, right? So when I see these cases, when I see these incidents, it upsets me. And sure, and like I said at the very beginning of this, for as long as there will be human beings doing this job, there will be human beings doing wrong things because it's inherent in our flesh, right? When we operate outside of the spirit, that is part of this human experience. However, we can choose See, the nice thing about that, and the nice thing about actual freedom, is that you have freedom of choice. And anytime you have a freedom of choice, that means you also have the freedom to choose to do the right thing. You don't have to just do the wrong thing because it's the easy thing, because it's what the flesh wants, because you want to spend 40 minutes in the back of a car with some girl who happens to not be your wife when you're married. I don't know. Besides the whole sex and uniform thing, which we can assume, maybe they're having a Bible study in the back of the vehicle. I don't know. But whatever the flesh wants to do, in having choice, we can say, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. So I want you to think about that. And we're going to talk more about this in coming weeks in different facets and looking down some different roads with it. But I think this is just as applicable to us in law enforcement as it is to the public. And I think we, as citizens of this great country, are really struggling when it comes to this idea. And there are so many examples, so many news stories. Probably 80-90% of the news stories that I looked at this week would apply to exactly this situation. So, America is falling further and further away from this concept, and I believe that it will have devastating effects on the future of this country. So this week, I want you to think about the idea of personal responsibility. So what can you do and what can I do to better exhibit this principle of personal accountability? That's my challenge for you this week. That does it for this week's Morning Roll Call. I'll see you Thursday in the interview room, next Monday in Morning Roll Call. But in the meantime, I'm going to see you out there on the Blue Line.